Forest. Florida State plays them the 5th game of the season.
Right.
Last season, please point to us how Wake Forest became the first team since 2008 to win the Atlantic Division. First team other than Florida State to win the Atlantic Division. Only the second double-digit win season in the program's history. What happened last season with Wake Forest?
I think one of the things you look at is that Dave Clawson benefited from being the coach at Wake Forest, where there was an abundance of patience that there wasn't going to be at a lot of other programs. I mean, look, Clawson went there in 2014, had a couple of 3-9 seasons, started to try to put his imprint on the program. And as the years went along, look, we're in 2021. Most coaches don't get that 7-year run, that 7-year leash to try and do it. But it's Wake Forest, where expectations were moderate at best. Hopes were high, but expectations were a lot more reasonable. They had a lot of depth last year. They had a tremendous amount of depth. They had experience at pretty much every position. So you get the season where, as you pointed out, they went 11-3. They went 7-1 in conference. They won the Atlantic Division. They won the Gator Bowl, and all of those things. And Clawson, that put Clawson at 51% winning percentage. So it's not like, he's had this tremendous run. He's had a good 3 to 4 year run of getting them in bowl games and being a lot more competitive. And that really catapulted Wake Forest last year and put them on a whole different level. So he got a contract extension in December. With Wake being a private school, there were no terms of the contract released. But you look at now, building off what they had last year, as Clawson has told me, we're not going to catch anybody off guard anymore. Now it's really a put up or shut up kind of mentality. Last year he had a theme for the program, which was going from good to great. Now it's about mindset. And the thing that he was preaching going into spring camp was, last year was great. We had a great season. Enjoy it. Turn the page. Move on into what's next. You have to focus on what's next, because if you're still going into spring thinking about how successful the season was in 2021, you're going to get your butts kicked, because you don't have the right mindset. You're not looking forward enough. So, look, as you pointed out, it was only the second 10-win season in school history. The other one was 2006, and they had a great year. They've lost some key players, but again, since they had so much depth last year, they've got enough coming back. The depth isn't as good this year as it was last year.
Looking at what happened last year, obviously we talked a little bit about that. They started off 8-0, finished the year 10, finished regular season 10-2. Mm-hmm. Was that, in your opinion, and let's be honest, Wake Forest before the pandemic had a winning season, so it's like they went from 1-10 to 10-2. Mm-hmm. But was this the sign of the future for us, or do you think this was more of a one-time thing?
I think that the answer is it's still to be determined. They've got to put out another similar like season this year for it to be anything other than a flash in the pan. This is very much a what have you done for me lately? Last year was great, and there are all the accolades on campus and in the athletic facilities and the football facilities about everything they did. But if you don't compete at that same level, and I'm not saying they have to go 11-3, 7-1, win the division, do all those things, but you have to be close to that level again. Or last year was a flash in the pan.
Along those same lines, the losses was to Clemson. That was their one
right.
in the Atlantic Division. Clemson is still the. They play Clemson September 20th, then play Florida State. Is there a concern that from that point you have, you could start off 3-0, but you could easily be by the 5th game of the season?
Oh, absolutely. And look, Clemson remains a bit of an enigma. Right, because it's inconceivable. Being from Southern California originally, I watched DJ Uyunglele from the time he was a freshman in high school, and it's shocking to see the disassemblage of his game right now. And you look at Clemson and having to replace their coordinators, and you look back at last season, and was DJ that bad, or is Clemson's offensive line that porous? Did Tony Elliott do a poor job not accommodating for a running game or lack of a running game to help DJ along? So Clemson remains a big unknown as far as I'm concerned. They should be better than what they weren't that bad last year. Let's be honest. They really weren't. They were bad by historical standards of what they've accomplished in the Dabo Sweeney era. But by a national standpoint, they really weren't that bad. It's a big unknown. But it is a tough road when you've got Clemson and then you've got Florida State. And, everyone who's paying any attention expects Florida State to be drastically improved. So, look, I'm a Jordan Travis fan. I like the kid's game. I whether he's at 200 or 215 or 190, I like the kid's game. He's very athletic. And so Florida State's got a lot of returning production. And I think this goes to what Clawson has been trying to impress upon the team. Put last year behind you. It was great. It was fun. Had a great ride. You'll see all the, accolades in there, but you almost got to walk through with blinders on and focus strictly on this season and put it behind you. Like he said, you're not going to catch anybody by surprise anymore. You're going to get teams' best games because of what you accomplished last year. You better be prepared for it.
Yeah, Florida State struggled. When they visited Wake Forest, Florida State had Jordan Travis, but they also threw in Mackenzie Milton, but 6 turnovers in a game for FSU really hurt them, and put Florida State at 0-3. And I think you're right. Now for Wake Forest, another year, can they do it? Can they do something like that again? That would be gigantic for Wake Forest, and they brought great competition to Florida State the last couple of years, and that's something that, as the fan base and people covering the team, that's something that we're not usually used to right now, and it's always and it freaks out fans a little bit. So now Florida State versus Wake Forest are games, and I'm interested to see how that looks like this upcoming season between the two.
Well, and Wake Forest has some question marks. Look, at the start of it, the first thing anyone's going to look at when they look at Wake Forest is you've got a 5th-year senior quarterback in Sam Hartman, right? And I think anyone's going to agree Hartman's one of the top quarterbacks in the conference. And it's a rarity, frankly, in this day and age, to have a guy who's in his 5th year, has played all 5 years in the same program, right? And there's no transfer portal, in Sam Hartman. And the offense is his. And frankly, the team is his. And you see it during spring camp when I was out there covering it, that, it doesn't matter if you're Hartman's roommate, his best friend, or a newcomer on the team. If you're not stepping up, he's going to get in your face. And we saw it firsthand during some of the spring camp workouts. So there's no question that gives them a bit of an edge. He was a 4,000-yard passer last year, but he's also got to improve his game. And you don't hear that a lot about 5th-year seniors. He had 14 interceptions, and you've got to cut down. 39 touchdowns and the 14 INTs. You have got to cut down on the turnovers because it's too high of a ratio of turnovers to touchdowns. They've got depth at the skill positions. They lost Ja'Cory Roberson at wide receiver, but they've got A.T. Perry. They're going to rely heavily on him. 1,200 yards and receptions last year and about 15 touchdowns. They're going to go running back by committee again, like they did last year. They lost Christian Beal-Smith to the transfer portal, but they'll get Justice Ellison, leading with his 500 yards that he had last year and 7 touchdowns. So there is the skill position depth that returned from last year. Some questions on the offensive line. They spent a lot of the spring moving pieces around because they had players recovering from off-season surgery. And, of course, they lost Zach Tom. And so there was a lot of shuffling around, but they think they've got the bodies to do it. The questions are on defense. They revamped the defensive coaching staff, and it was needed. They brought over Brad Lambert from Purdue. You look, Purdue was 33rd or 34th in the country last year in points allowed under him. Wake Forest was 88th. So there's a pretty drastic difference. Wake Forest was 91st in the country in total defense. The idea of bringing Lambert in is to bring a more aggressive style of defense. There was too much of a bend but don't break, with giving up tons of yards in between the 20s, and then all it takes is one decent play, and you're getting points put up against you. So the key was to become more aggressive. And he made some changes as well when he brought in some other coaches. He brought in new safeties coach James Adams, who was with him at Purdue and actually played at Wake Forest in the early 2000s. Glenn Spencer, the linebacker coach from South Florida, is new there also. So the whole point of the spring was to watch the defense become a little bit more aggressive. Now, when you're learning a whole new scheme, and it's a significantly new scheme, you almost had to slow down the offense a little bit in spring early on to allow the defense to get caught up in their learning and their assignments and learning how to react instead of think, as Lambert put it, early on in the spring. We want to get past the point where they're thinking and they're learning just to react based on, now they know the scheme, they know the process. And so for the first, I would say probably 3 weeks, you saw them have to slow down the offense a little bit in the live drills, the live scrimmage drills, in order to allow the defense really to get caught up and get their feet under them. By the end, the defense was fully there. By the end of spring camp, the defense was absolutely fully there. The defensive line looked terrific. You got Kobe Turner, who is a transfer from Richmond, who really made an impact in the spring and really looked good. The linebackers looked good. They lacked depth at linebackers. They lost a couple guys to the transfer portal, linebackers and defensive backs, who were really probably third on the depth chart. So Clausen is going to look to the transfer portal. Wake Forest is not a heavy university where heavily the revolving door is going on the transfer portal. There are very few leaving and very few coming in. But in order to have any semblance of the depth that he had last year, he's going to have to hit the transfer portal this summer, at least for the linebackers and defensive backs.
Tony, before we go back to the spring real quick, I want to touch on something you talked about Sam Hartman. We saw what he did firsthand. Wake Forest beat Florida State by the most points of any team last season. I mean, they're the ones who absolutely handled us. And aside from what Logan talked about, how contributed to that loss, Sam Hartman, when you talk about the core in the ACC, Sam Hartman and Kenny Pickett last season were two who played for the ACC title. Yet, of the returning players, you talk about top quarterbacks in the ACC. You talk about DJ at Clemson, Tyler Van Dyke at Miami. There's a level of disrespect that Sam Hartman is giving, considering the fact of what he did last season at Wake Forest.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think part of it is because he's at Wake Forest. I mean, again, we're talking about a program that from a national attention standpoint kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, look, we're people who follow college football 24/7, especially during the season, and we watch everybody and everything. We joke in my household that during the fall, the DVR is completely unavailable to anything that isn't college football.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with
that. Yeah, no, and look, fortunately, I married a Southern woman who totally gets it and is on board with all of it. But also because I'm on the voting committee for the Nagurski and the Bolitnikoff and the Outland. I got to watch players from all over the country every week. So we see a little bit of everything. And I saw Hartman a lot, even though I was still on the West Coast last season. And so I knew who he was, how good he was. But I think from a national standpoint of we'll call them the casual fan, it's still Wake Forest. And they have to be reminded of how good Wake Forest was last year. And they have to be reminded what Hartman did last year. So I think there is, I don't know if it's intentional disrespect, but I would certainly say he gets overlooked more than he should.
From the spring, from what you saw in the spring, you covered the spring up at Wake Forest. Who is Hartman is obviously the number one guy. Who is the name of a player that kind of maybe flew last season, or just someone to watch for? Who should fans be watching out for? And it doesn't have to be just a name. Who are some of the names fans should be watching out for?
Sure. I think the first one is A.T. Perry. I think he's a special wide receiver. He's got size. He's got speed. He's the guy who's going to go, he's the guy who's going to go down the sideline for you. He's going to beat he's going to beat the defensive backs with his speed. He was the number 2 receiver last year behind Roberson, but I really think he's got the skill to be one of the best receivers in the conference. It's hard with the running backs because, again, they're going to go running back by committee, but I really like Justice Ellison in the sense of his running style. He's a guy who you're not going to catch really behind the line. You're not going to get him moving backwards. He's very forward. The legs are always pumping. And, even when there's not much there, he's still going to pick up a couple of yards because of his style of running. So I think those are the guys you're going to look at on offense. I think defense, there's a lot of question marks. Like I said, the defensive backs all through spring, honestly, were very hit and miss. They got beat on the deep balls far too often, even at the end of camp. There is a lot of work that needed to be done or needs to be done during the summer and going into camp to get those guys ready. I look at a guy like Ryan Smenda, the linebacker. I think he's got the chance to have a good season. But like I said earlier, I really like Kobe Turner, the transfer from Richmond on the defensive line. He's got a bit of a beast mentality and was living in the backfield quite a bit during spring camp.
Before Logan goes on to ask you a question, we have to do something. We do it in Tallahassee. We do it when he's on location. It's the half of the show. Logan, you knew you weren't going to escape it. You missed it last week. I went last week. I couldn't reach your shoes. I couldn't fit in your size 14s or whatever you are. Tell the fans on the like button.
Yeah. I promise you I'm not at 14. There's no 14 shoes on me right now unless I'm really grown. But no, everybody hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe so then everybody gets notified every time we're live on here. Usually every Wednesday evening. That's when we're live, and now we've got some guests on to kind of give us the real good insight into these teams that we're going to be watching, covering these games all throughout the year. So definitely make sure you hit the like button, comment if you have any questions too for any of us on here. Definitely throw it in the chat, but definitely hit the like button. But I had a question about Wake Forest and their offensive line. You were talking about that. There's definitely maybe some question marks there. And, Florida State, I think their best position group right now after watching the spring is that defensive line group with Fabian Lovett. You got Robert Cooper back, 2 big-time veterans, and you've got even 2 potential starters behind him with Jared Jackson and Malcolm Ray and some other guys. States, you lose Jermaine Johnson and you lose Keir Thomas, and that didn't seem to be much of a factor there in that third game for FSU against Wake Forest of the season. But still, you're looking at bringing another really, really kind of nasty defensive line. And what are your thoughts on how, Wake Forest is going to try to work there, and maybe some guys that you think will step up and try to control that interior defensive line? And, even if Jared Verse, Florida State's new star defensive end, and Derek McLendon, if those guys are able to kind of take care of things on the edge too, I'm just kind of wondering how that offensive line is prepared heading into the season. Is there maybe a weakness there that Florida State is going to try to take advantage of in this upcoming matchup later in the year?
I think there's a couple things, Logan. I think obviously the first thing is there's no replacing a guy like Zach Tom and just, snapping your fingers and filling in a space. The guy was an elite level left tackle and had Hartman's back, throughout the season and was that good. I think part of what happened and part of what we saw with the spring with the offensive line can be a little misleading. Part of that is because there were several guys who missed spring because Wake Forest played deeper into the calendar than what they historically do. And so the nagging injuries that needed healing, the things that needed minor surgery had to wait until basically mid to late January, and they weren't really recovered for spring camp. I think one of the things, like I said earlier, there were a lot of pieces moving around with second and third team guys getting a lot of snaps. But before anyone pushes the panic button on Wake's offensive line, you got to remember they've got 4 super seniors returning, 4 guys in their 6th season. But they weren't there necessarily for all of camp or any of camp. So I think what happens is Clausen is looking at the ability to come back and say, we have a lot of guys who've taken a lot of snaps. We're going to be able to mix and match pieces throughout the season because we got a lot of the younger guys, some snaps during spring. And so, he's got a lot of experience that he knows is already ready to go. They didn't necessarily need spring camp. It would have been a luxury to have them, but they'll be working out in the summer. There is no one expected to miss the season. The offense came out of spring camp really pretty healthy. There was a couple of injuries on the defensive side, which, again, depth is an issue on defense, but the offensive line came back healthy, and they are coming back very experienced. They just weren't there in the spring. So Clausen's counting on guys just who already know the offense and are ready to plug and play.
Gotcha.
I have a question. I'm going to Wake Forest, and then I want to ask you a question about Wake Forest's thoughts on Florida State. But you look at what Dave Clausen has done. 6 bowl games, most bowl games for any in Wake Forest history. Like talking about, this is a program who, with all due respect, was kind of bottom feeders in the ACC for them and Duke, bottom feeders for the longest time.
Sure.
Has Dave Clausen taken his spot as the best coach in Wake Forest history? Do you think?
Yes. Yeah, I do. And look, his winning percentage is, he's got the highest winning percentage at the school of any coach in the last 70 years. It's only 51%, but as you point out, Jason, this is Wake Forest, so the bar really wasn't that high. I think what's happened, going back to what we were talking about earlier, Wake Forest's patience with Clausen and giving him the room to move along, put in his program, do it his way. And it was an extension of time that you wouldn't necessarily have gotten other places. But because it was Wake Forest, you got it. And so, yeah, I think right now he sits there. And look, his name was getting thrown around for the Virginia Tech job. His name was getting thrown around for other availabilities. So it was a smart move by athletic director John Curry to wrap him up for however many more years it is. Again, it's a private school, so they didn't feel compelled to release the contract terms. Clausen certainly feels like he's all in. Of course, any coach presents that when you're talking to them on campus, in their facilities and so on. But yeah, I don't think there's any question right now that he's got to be, if he's not the top coach in Wake Forest history, he's got to be in the conversation, at least to the top 2.
I mean, your other options are Jim Rogue. I completely forgot Makovic was the coach there for a minute.
Yeah, exactly. For about a minute. Exactly.
A long time ago on that one.
Right.
Last question from me. You mentioned a little bit before, I love my alma mater. I love Florida State. But when you mentioned that Wake Forest there's concern with them playing Florida State at this time. Convince me, a Florida State fan, Florida State grad, why Wake Forest beat us by 21 points, convincingly beat us last season, is worried about Florida State. This is the praise Florida State portion of the program. And so
a couple of things. One, the game being in Tallahassee. And I'm excited to go down there. So that will be fun in and of itself. But look, playing in Tallahassee is always a challenge. I think Mike Norvell, I was a big proponent of Norvell taking the job at Florida State, and it convinced some Florida State fans that they were going to be thrilled with what he could do there. I'm still sitting on the fence on that as to what he's actually done, being 8-12 or whatever he is, in his time at Florida State. But I think you've got a lot to build around. They did well with the transfer portal. They've added 10, 11 new players through the portal. You've got an experienced quarterback in Jordan Travis. Wake Forest fans should have no inclination that the game against Florida State this year will be nearly as easy as it was last year. And Florida State fans, since this is the Praise Florida State section of the program, Florida State fans should go in with a much higher degree of confidence than what they had last season.
I like that. We should have the Praise Florida State section. Because Logan likes to be an eternal pessimist because I'm not the biggest Mike Norvell fan, and he's the president of the Mike Norvell fan club. I'm just
yeah. Well, we got to remember though, Jason is the biggest ambassador for Willie Taggart. We love Willie Taggart, and that's the biggest Willie Taggart fan.
Logan, you got a question about DJ Williams?
No, yeah. Well, I was just going to mention too something that we should have brought up. Maybe I don't know if y'all covered it last week's, but it's something about Florida State's roster. I don't think Tony would really care too much about it, but Florida State lost one of its better.
No, I saw it. I actually saw it. If you're talking about DJ Williams, I actually saw that.
Yeah, Tony knows more than maybe Jason does, and we might have a discussion, Jason.
We have to pray. Tony, you're getting praised more than any guest we've had.
I appreciate that. I would just say I would put it in these terms. Running Last Word on College Football as we do, I am blessed to have 20 writers around the country covering different beats. And so there's this constant feed and flow of information. And then, like I said, being on the voting panel for the Football Writers Association All-American team, there's nothing that doesn't get my attention at some point or another, so, and look, I mean, I didn't take it for granted when I moved from Southern California out to Charlotte and took on this new role. And so even though I thought I knew all there was to know about the ACC, I didn't assume it and dove headfirst into absolutely everything I could consume out there. So, look, I mean, I like Florida State's roster. I like the way Norvell has hit the transfer portal and used it to his advantage because there were significant holes to fill, and he went out and got guys that can contribute now, that can contribute this season. That's not always the case with the transfer portal. Sometimes the transfer portal, Wake Forest is going to use it for depth. Wake Forest isn't looking to the portal to get a new starting middle linebacker or a starting strong safety. They're using it for depth. Norvell went out and got guys that are ready to compete now, get starting, play for starting positions now. And so I think that he did exactly what Florida State needed in the offseason and in the spring. I mean, this is going to be a very competitive ACC again. You got, North Carolina State. Again, we talk about returning quarterbacks, right? And you look at Devin Leary coming back, with North Carolina State. And he had a great season last year. And he had the kind of touchdown to interception ratio that you would like to see out of Sam Hartman. I mean, he had the 35 touchdowns and only threw 5 picks. And, that's what Wake Forest would hope to get out of somebody like Hartman. So you look at, NC State, again, Clemson being a bit of an enigma and a question right now. Florida State likely to be improved. Wake Forest, very much high expectations now, but they got to put it on the field. So going to make for a very exciting division race.